Can you hear me? Dave can put it back up when he gets here. In addition to his law degrees and the ones before that, Dave and I crossed paths with each other when he also got his executive MBA at the University of Tennessee, longer ago than either one of us would care to remember. But I have watched his career, and given what he knows and does in Anderson County and the district, I figure we got a lot to learn because most of us don't get involved in that. Dave was born and reared here in Anderson County, and he lives now in Oak Ridge with his wife, Josephine, who practices as magistrate judge in Clinton. He practiced law first in Nashville, and then he came back to this area in the early 90s to set up a private practice. He has admitted to and practiced before all the Tennessee state and federal courts, as well as the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 6th District and the U.S. Supreme Court. That would be fascinating to hear about. He was elected first to the position of Anderson County District Attorney in '98 and again in 2002, and became the District Attorney General for the 7th District in 2006, and then the last election into 2014. He has served as the president of the District Attorneys General Conference 2 years ago. He has a very active community role, and he was a founder in Allies for Substance Abuse Prevention, ASAP here. He's been on the 7th Judicial District Crime Task Force. The Clinch Valley Children's Center has been one of his activities, and the Anderson County Family Justice Center, which is here in Oak Ridge, and has been on the board of several community organizations, and also has volunteered as a youth sports coach. Your youth are now adults. I don't know if you're still doing that or not, but let us talk about crime in Anderson County and thereabouts, and hope that none of us have ever experienced that.
It's good to be out and with people again. I still kind of feel it's a celebration when we can get together. So it's good to be here this morning, particularly great to be with Rotarians. I'm a former Rotarian myself, and I think the last time I was with this club, I was a visiting Rotarian. So it's good to be with all of you and so many familiar faces. Let me start just briefly by talking about what I do so we can set some parameters for questions or issues you guys might want to talk about. There are 31 DAs that cover the state from Memphis to Mountain City. In Anderson County, we are part of the 7th Judicial District. We're very fortunate in that we are our own judicial district. Many of my colleagues cover multiple counties, some as many as 7 counties. And having a small judicial district for us means that when we need a judge is available in Clinton. When we need the DA is here. And some folks have a lot of traveling to do. It's hard to attend to matters in their districts the same way we are fortunate to have resources here. The DA is the chief law enforcement officer in their part of the state, also responsible for prosecuting all crimes, from speeding tickets to murder. We have 5 courts in Anderson County that we attend. About 10,000 arrests every year. I've got 8 assistants, and we're conducting court somewhere every day. We conduct operations 24/7, 365. Much of that activity has to do with criminal investigations, and we're doing undercover investigations from aerial surveillance to wiretapping to just regular narcotics investigations every day as well. So it's a interesting, dynamic job that I really love. DAs do lots of things. We manage jail populations. We have a jail in Anderson County now that houses up to 500 people. Pre-COVID, on any given day, we had about 430 people in jail. Trying to decide who needs those jail beds on any given day is part of the job I didn't frankly anticipate. It turns out now that with the drug addiction problems, the composition of our inmates have changed. We have a lot more women than we used to have. It turns out many of those women are in age-bearing years, and many of them are drug addicted. And so on any given day, we have a number of pregnant, drug-addicted females in jail, many of those high-risk pregnancies, determining the proper placement for them, both to protect the fetus and them, and the taxpayer who's bearing the cost of that care. It's sort of an unanticipated twist in the job. We're trying to manage a system, a criminal justice system designed to promote public safety, justice, and general rule following, a safe society. But our criminal justice system was designed and resourced for a different society. A society that for many of us was a society of our youth, where you didn't lock your front door, you could leave your keys in the car. I like to tell an anecdote about our chief jailer, who served most of the time I've been in public service, but just recently retired. His name was Avery Johnson. And Chief Johnson was in charge of our jail in Anderson County in 1982, the year of the World's Fair. That Christmas Eve in 1982, he had 2 people in custody in Anderson County, and one of those, he likes to tell, was really there just to cook for the one person he had to keep in jail. The jail was in a small corner of the 3rd floor of the courthouse. And now many of you will know we have a sprawling complex on the banks of the Clinch River in Clinton. As I mentioned, a capacity of 500. We're not incarcerating people at a different rate in Anderson County. If you go to any county in Tennessee, you will find a relatively new justice center or jail facility. Our society's changed. We're all familiar with how it has changed. And so our system is struggling to deal with the social problems that represent the increased crime rate. It's in many ways under-resourced and overmatched in that battle. And so we try and be creative, innovative, to try and do more with the resources that we have. But just about anywhere you go in America, you will hear the same concerns and problems from sheriffs or chiefs of police or district attorneys. And in that way, Anderson County is no different than any other place in Tennessee, and Tennessee is no different than any other state in the nation. Were you to ask any chief of police or sheriff or district attorney in any state, they will tell you that the number one reason for that change are drugs. I've heard estimates ranging from 80% to 100%. I think 100% is a little too high, but drugs are primarily responsible for our crime. Whether folks are committing crime under the influence of drugs, stealing to finance their drug addiction, part of a drug trafficking organization where they're distributing drugs, drugs seem to be at the root of those problems. Long ago, I was a social scientist of sorts, but I'm really not qualified to talk about why. Why are people so attracted to drugs? But we need to address that root cause of our societal problem. We're not going to incarcerate our way out of America's drug addiction problem. So we try and do other things to attack the issue, whether that's speaking to school children to make them aware of drug issues, starting allied agencies you heard about, the ASAP or the Family Justice Center, or other organizations to try and address the root cause of those issues. We're all sort of struggling to deal with them. So, skipping over all of those societal issues, the drugs that impact our society and our community in Anderson County change. When I started this job in 2006, I would have been talking to you about homegrown, manufactured methamphetamine. Anderson County was at that time plagued by meth labs. Meth cooks would buy pseudoephedrine containing cold remedies at local pharmacies. They would take it back to their home or sometimes just out in the woods, and they would manufacture methamphetamine. Their manufacturing techniques were dangerous. They produced toxic fumes. Sometimes they resulted in fires and explosions. Anderson County at that time had more meth labs detected than any other county in Tennessee. Tennessee and Missouri would trade off from year to year on national statistics as to which state had the worst meth lab problem in the nation. So in 2006, some people pointed to Anderson County as sort of the worst of the worst of the worst with regard to homegrown methamphetamine. We haven't seen a homegrown meth lab in years in Anderson County. That problem is gone. But as soon as we solve one, another one crops up. So we elicited federal help, working with the DEA and our crime task force, local law enforcement. We began to make cases against the people that were buying the pseudoephedrine and the folks that were using the pseudoephedrine to cook it. That was a great thing because we eliminated the fires, we eliminated the toxic fume exposure for children. We didn't have landlords that had to come in and tear out subfloor and carpeting and the walls of rented properties because meth had been made in their rented homes. But we had a huge group of people that were addicted to drugs. So they looked for the next thing. Cocaine was a problem, particularly in Oak Ridge in 2006. And so if you had a cocaine case in Anderson County, you could bet that it came out of Oak Ridge. If you had a methamphetamine case in Anderson County in 2006, you could bet it came out of somewhere other than Oak Ridge. At that time, Oak Ridge was on the street called Coke Ridge. And Oak Ridge supplied Knoxville with its cocaine, as opposed to the other way around. But that's changed too, fortunately, and cocaine's not the problem that it was in 2006. We started interdicting cocaine as it was coming into Oak Ridge, principally through Atlanta and Memphis. There was a huge effort to do some significant federal partner investigations, tapping phones and so forth. At one point in time, we had intercepted 1.4 million phone calls and text messages as part of that case and stemmed the tide of the cocaine flow. But as part of that dynamic reaction, people turned to pills. Most of you have heard of the opioid pill problem that has plagued Appalachia, not just Eastern Tennessee, but Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, Southwest Virginia. For some reason, the Appalachian areas were particularly susceptible to the opioid crisis. We've worked on that problem as well by pursuing the opioid manufacturers and suing them here and in other parts of Tennessee and the nation. We've stemmed the flow of the illicit opioids and the diverted prescription drugs. However, we had people that were addicted to opioids. There was a demand, and they were going to look for a supply. Pat taught me that as part of my MBA program. So they turned to opiates, the original form, heroin. As we were legalizing marijuana in California and Colorado, the Mexican cartels, and particularly the Sinaloa cartel, recognized a business opportunity, a business problem, and a corresponding opportunity. Their marijuana revenue was going away because Americans could get cheaper domestically grown and legalized marijuana. They weren't going to make their riches off of importing illegal marijuana. But they knew that Americans had a raging opioid addiction. And so they converted their marijuana fields to poppy fields, and they began manufacturing heroin. Heroin previously had come into the United States from parts of Asia, principally to the Detroit, Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan area. And then when we saw it, which frankly was very, very rare, it came out of the Detroit area. But heroin now comes through Mexico, through the cartels. It's ironically still distributed through Detroit, where our cocaine came through Memphis and Atlanta from Mexico. Our heroin comes from Detroit from Mexico. So we had this weird dynamic pop up that we talked to kids about. That people became addicted to opioids that had no criminal record. Folks that would never think of smoking a joint of marijuana somehow rationalized or perhaps innocently became addicted to opioids. Those pills on the street in Anderson County cost as much as $145 per pill. The original price was about $1 a milligram. One common dosage would be a 30 milligram roxicodone. So that's a $30 pill. But others ranged much higher. People could not sustain that kind of habit. They would take 5 to 8 pills per day, largely crushing them and snorting them, sometimes crushing them and injecting them. And as they ran out of their own resources, they would begin to steal from family members, principally, and then from others. But as heroin became available again, heroin was $10 a hit, as opposed to $30, $80, $120, or $145 a hit. So addicts converted to heroin and began injecting. So a few years ago, we went through this horrible transition where opioid pill addicts were converting to heroin. And we had a tremendous rush of overdoses. In 1 month, just in Oak Ridge, we had 10 overdoses. That was in January, I think, of 2018. They didn't know what they were doing. They were unfamiliar with the dosage of heroin. The heroin, unlike the prescription pills, had an irregular strength, and if they guessed wrong, they had an overdose, too often fatal overdose. So we're still, frankly, fighting that heroin battle. It's been complicated by the rise of fentanyl, an old drug for some of us, usually used for cancer treatment. The only time we saw fentanyl was when a grandchild would get grandmother's fentanyl patch used for cancer treatment, treating chronic pain. And they would dip it like Skoal, this piece of patch, and sometimes that was fatal. But fentanyl now is coming in a powdered form, and it's so powerful. Just a few micrograms of fentanyl can be fatal, and we're told an amount of fentanyl the size of Abraham Lincoln's nose on a penny is a fatal dose of fentanyl. Because of that, it can be shipped in tiny quantities. And so fentanyl now arrives in Anderson County in FedEx envelopes and UPS envelopes because such a small quantity is needed. Drug dealers will then mix the fentanyl with heroin to make it more potent, which is appealing to addicts. Also, they're mixing fentanyl with other drugs. They're mixing fentanyl with cocaine, they're mixing fentanyl with methamphetamine, and they are manufacturing their own prescription pills. Drug dealers can buy pill presses on the internet. They can buy dyes for those presses that make the pills look like normal prescription drugs. And so some of our addicts are overdosing not knowing that they were not taking a pharmaceutical, but a imitation pharmaceutical made by some drug dealer who may have mixed it inadequately, may have added too much fentanyl, but pressed it into a pill form that looked like a roxicodone that they might buy off the street. I was talking to middle school students at Norwood Middle School about 6 weeks ago now. I began that morning in my office and I had an autopsy report, which is another one of my responsibilities, and it was a fentanyl overdose. That person had taken a fake prescription pill. And so I took that opportunity to talk to the kids about the natural developmental phenomenon of experimentation, but how dangerous that was today because of the unknown of what they were getting. So I shared with them that autopsy result I had seen that morning. When I got back to the office just before noon, there were 2 more autopsy reports on my desk. Both of those were fentanyl overdoses. I got 5 more that week. Every one of them was a fentanyl overdose. I don't think I have seen an autopsy report since that was an overdose death that wasn't a fentanyl overdose. Sometimes it's a mixed toxicity case where it will be fentanyl and heroin, just fentanyl, fentanyl and cocaine, fentanyl and methamphetamine, but they're all fentanyl. And unlike the other distribution methods that we combat on a daily basis, fentanyl is hard to stop because we're not interdicting the FedEx truck on the interstate. We're not stopping the fentanyl shipments and packages at the airport. We really need federal help to do that. Our drug dogs are not trained to detect fentanyl, and they can't be because fentanyl is so toxic that just the dust from fentanyl can kill. And we've lost officers, not here, but in other places, just from being exposed environmentally to the fentanyl that they're detecting. And so our officers now locally suit up in hazmat gear to handle drugs here in Anderson County because of the risk that fentanyl poses. So I guess the point is, it's always changing. Every time we stop something, another thing sort of erupts because we have ongoing addiction problems in the community, and we have societal problems that are causing people to pursue drugs. And those drugs are causing our crime problems. We continue to try and interdict those drugs to stop them from making it to Anderson County. We try and educate people, particularly children. We try and treat folks as resources will allow to help them beat the addiction problem. And ultimately, of course, we have to incarcerate folks. Those prison beds are very precious to us because our prison system is overcrowded and under-resourced in Tennessee. We can't hire prison guards presently. Some of you may have seen, I noticed last week, the Department of Corrections is advertising on TV for prison guards. They're offering a $5,000 bonus and have tremendously raised the salary to try and attract people to do that kind of work. Tennessee has thousands of people waiting on a prison bed on any given day. We just don't have enough beds for the folks that are waiting for them. And so many of them are housed in local jails. And that's one reason you see local jails across the state have had to enlarge or build new facilities, because most of them are housing a large number of state prisoners as well. Our number one problem right now, however, while drugs are here and they're going to continue to be here, frankly, is trying to stop the gang conflict that's occurring in Knoxville from crossing the Anderson County line. We've been very fortunate for a long time in this area. Knoxville sort of avoided the scourge of gang violence for a long time. We had gang members who were in Knoxville. We had gang members who were in Oak Ridge. But the Oak Ridge gang members have sort of been moved out to Knoxville. Many of them live in the West Knoxville area now. Knoxville had a gang presence from the Crips, a local arm of the Crips called Two Deuce Hoovers. They were the only game in town for a long time. We would occasionally see gang entries into our community. We've had Los Locos, we've had Bloods, MS-13, all have made appearances here. And they do that, they'll send a small group of gang members looking for new drug markets. We always try and make them feel very unwelcome here, and that's been successful in the past. And while Chattanooga and Memphis were plagued with gang problems, Knoxville really didn't experience that. But now Nashville and Knoxville are fully engaged in gang troubles, and that's what's happening. You're reading and hearing about shootings, often involving young people in Knoxville, and that's what's going on behind the scenes. So we're trying to keep those elements out of Anderson County. And that's occupying a lot of our time and energy right now, to let them know this is not a welcome place to be. So we're trying to stop them at the line. One of the greatest things I heard was when we were intercepting phone calls, some of the drug dealers we were listening to would refuse to cross the Solway Bridge. They would meet folks at the gas stations and businesses in the Solway area to exchange drugs for cash, but they wouldn't cross the bridge because Anderson County was too hot. That's great. We want them to continue to think Anderson County is too hot for them because we don't want that associated violence. But that's going to be a big challenge for us as a community to make sure that those problems don't spill over here. Good news, crime is down in Anderson County. We've had during COVID an uptick in domestic violence, probably not surprising. But we're down 31% in the last 15 years here in Anderson County, which is wonderful. That's thousands of crimes fewer each year. We've got a great team of people in place. Our chiefs of police, our sheriff, all work together to try and be communicative and collaborative and innovative to attack the new problems as they arise. And that's been very successful. That's not always been the case here. It's not always the case elsewhere. But we've got a great group of people up and down the line in Anderson County. Our judges are doing a great job. Our jail's doing a great job. Our community's doing a great job. And so I don't have any complaints or problems to report in that sense. We're blessed. We're blessed. And so we're up to the challenge and excited to meet it. And as soon as we tackle it, there'll be a new. So we'll keep our eyes open, ears peeled, and keep evolving to respond to the problems as they come up. I'm happy to take questions. We can talk about anything you like.
And if you have a question, Dave, if you don't mind just repeating it because we're recording the video and stuff like that.
Of course. Keep in mind, sorry, Ray, I'm limited in what I can say about pending cases. I think there are 8 things I can say about a pending case, but with that in mind, I'll talk about anything, right?
I'm curious about present population. What fraction might say?
Well, not all of them, but most all of them. I couldn't give you a hard number other than to say I would estimate somewhere in the 80 to 90% range. We have a number of people with mental illness problems in the jail, oftentimes drug-induced, sometimes hard to tease out. Is it drug-induced psychosis or is it self-medicating a pre-existing mental health condition? But most all of them are drug-related in some shape, form, or fashion. We had to reduce our jail population for community spread issues, to protect jailers and prisoners. So our population we took down to about 300 during the first wave of COVID. We started to let it creep up again to try and deal with the backlog. And frankly, we've got a tremendous backlog. Our courts were essentially shut down for a year. And so all of those cases are waiting. Justice is waiting. And on the street, some of our criminals have told our police officers, you can't do anything to me. And so we have to deal with this issue that some of our criminals that need apprehension about their behavior have lost that apprehension of punishment being tied to their bad behavior. So we've got some heavy lifting to do here for the next couple of years to catch up and to sort of restore some order. David? Tennessee's not doing well. While Anderson County, we're having some success, Tennessee is not. The FBI ranks violent crime states, and any year you would check in the last 10 years, Tennessee is first, second, third, or fourth in the nation in its violent crime rate. We were #1 in the nation in, I think, 2009, 10, and 11, somewhere around there. This year, I think we're 4th in the nation in violent crime. We have some of the most violent cities in the nation. At one time, I think we had 4 of the top 20 most violent cities in the nation. So we've got some problems in Tennessee. Our laws are a little light on sentencing. Our resources for drug treatment are meager. And so the problem reflects some of those choices that we have made. Jim? So the question, and I apologize, Tony, you just told me to repeat the question and I immediately failed to do that. So Jim asks about drug users versus dealers. What's the outcome for drug users in terms of punishment? Is that fair, Jim? So it's oftentimes very difficult to tell the difference between a drug user and a drug dealer because many of the users are dealing. Sometimes the argument is made as, well, they're dealing, but they're just dealing to feed their own habit. But we do have some true drug dealers. Oftentimes I'll get a question in a group like this about marijuana in that context. So let me take this opportunity to deal with that. There's a myth that our prison system is full of people who are in prison for marijuana. It's almost impossible to get into prison in Tennessee for marijuana. And it's literally impossible unless you have a ½ pound or more of marijuana. I asked our sheriff 10 months ago to check our jail population to see how many people we had in jail on marijuana charges. And on that day, the answer was there were 27 people in jail who had marijuana charges, but not one of them was in jail just for marijuana. They were arrested for something and they had marijuana in their pocket or something like that. So marijuana is not the problem, but the drug addicts that are just addicted and they're charged with simple possession, that's a misdemeanor, a misdemeanor. The maximum punishment would be 11 months and 29 days. As a practical matter, for a first offense, they're looking at probation and some sort of treatment option, drug testing while on probation, abstinence classes, that sort of thing. Honestly, it's not very successful. As they continue to offend and we see them back in court, then there is progressively more and more punishment offered to them, ultimately incarceration. Mike?
2 more questions. Mike, what's the gentleman you're asking?
Well, most of the folks in our jail are poor, uneducated, with a criminal history. They have spotty employment records. Most of them are Caucasian because most of our community is Caucasian, and so the jail population represents the community. It's we have, I guess, about 77,000 people in Anderson County, and our victims and criminals typically come from the same 5,000, 4,000 people. And so oftentimes, if you sample our jail population, it's just which of those 4,000 or 5,000 people are among the 400, 430 that are in jail that day. Oftentimes, the crime is against others in their family or circle of friends who also are committing crime. But that's a typical demographic. I've talked to folks who are addicted and in our jail. Why? You know, what's led you here? And with regard to drug addiction in particular, they essentially say hopelessness. You know, I'll say, did you not know methamphetamine was going to rot your teeth, damage your liver, ruin your life? Something similar with cocaine or heroin. And the answer is always, of course, everybody knows that. And then the next question that follows, well, why? Why did you choose to do that? And the answer is something like, well, why not? I'm never going to have anything. I'm never going to have a job. I'm never going to have a home. I'm never going to have a life. If I can be happy for a few hours, that's as good as it's going to get for me. Was that?
Well, Pat had the last one.
I'm sorry,
I
Pat.
hope you don't mind, Dave will stay. a couple
Absolutely.
minutes, but-
Some of what I was curious about, ASAP, the mention of the root cause of this is illustrated. Are we making any headway? Is this, the root cause is so complex, but are we making headway with this? Right?
Well, yeah, I guess I would revert to the 31% crime reduction. We're making some difference locally. What's causing that difference? I can't tell you. I think the answer is lots of little pieces and incremental improvement. This year, I've talked to every school child in our school system, county and city. The sheriff's department is doing that as well, educational programs. So whether it's ASAP or law enforcement, my office, programs through the school itself, we're trying to work on education to make a difference. But, it's successful with some kids and not with others. Thank you all so much for having me. I've enjoyed being here with you.
And I think David will stay around because I know some of you have to get back to work, but if you have other questions. We're glad you're here, but boy, what a sobering thing to share with us, but it's important that you share it. I guess I would say, representing us and the other Rotary clubs, tell us what we can do. Because we're always looking for good things to do to help the community. So if you have thoughts and other people have thoughts, please do that.